and any additional analysis that we found when we initially looked at any gaps or increased flood risk in the initial task, which is 4A, which we've been collecting along. So the minimal guidelines are making sure it's sensible. If there is an identified sponsor, that's an important part, a reasonable planning level cost estimate, identifying where the roadways, structures, farm and land terrain, if those are at risk. So that's part of the evaluation process, to screen to make sure that this is a project or wants to be included in the report as a evaluation or study. So moving to the next process or next is the strategies, which is essentially any of these actions that we have that aren't identified as studies or projects. And these can include education or outreach strategies. They work well under this category. Buyouts can be included under this category. And again, when we start looking at the screening requirements, does it have a planning cost level estimate? Is it identified sponsor, and show the estimated flood risk and reduction? And that will identify it as a strategy. So based on these, we go to the more meat of the data, which is the next slide. The more meat of the evaluation. We'll go through each one of these and look at a project benefit cost ratio. It needs to be above 1.0, and there's a detailed spreadsheet that's included, detailed directions in the water board that we'll follow that allows us to get a consistent benefit cost ratio. A significant one, again, is as a willing sponsor for any one of these particular evaluations or projects. A significant one, again, is there no known challenging implementation constraints like right-of-way or utility conflicts? Is there some permitting issues we need to identify if there's any significant impediments to including that in the in this particular project? And does it meet the RFG specific requirements to incorporate a project or strategy into the flood plan? So from step 5, after those, we've reviewed those, we'll present a report. Move to the next slide. Essentially, our last step after going through all these is presenting for public comment the recommended studies, projects, and strategies of all the stuff that we have collected for public comment, and then of course moving to the final adoption by the group. So that is our process. It's pretty straightforward. We followed the water board guidance in this particular project or this particular process, but this allows us to take all the data that we have collected under our first task and task 2 and task 4A to start identifying what categories these all need to be in, if they meet the required screening criteria for each one of those particular projects, strategy or study, and presenting that it meets the data, and it allows the next step moving forward to start identifying which ones you all are going to actually recommend that we move forward with. But this is kind of an overarching, including all of the data that we have collected. So that is our process. Can I answer? Y'all have any questions for all of these that I can answer?
Yes, Scott. Not a question, but just a comment. At the Water Development Water Conference that was recently had, there was a presentation that included a piece for evaluating the projects, especially with the cost-benefit ratio analysis, with a financial, social, and environmental component associated with that cost-benefit ratio. And the fact was that in many of the colonia areas, for example, that have recurrent issues, sometimes the value of the homes themselves is not of such a high number that it gives you a good benefit cost ratio. But when you include the social and environmental components, and which is something that many of the grants that are out there are looking at nowadays, that it would probably be beneficial for us to include some of that in our um, evaluation processes. Did you give any thought to that at all?
Uh, go.
Scott, if I could, Chairman,
Absolutely.
the Water Development Board created a special BCA toolkit. So like when we do these for FEMA, there's a FEMA toolkit. The Water Development Board's created toolkit is assigning certain average size homes with certain market values across the state. And that's a way of equalizing, you know, like a colonia with, say, downtown Austin. You know, you're going to have the same house having the same property values so that BCAs are more standard. And it was a way of them trying to be more equitable with these BCA calculations.
But on the social, I mean, you're looking at the financial, the social and the environmental components of, for example, of a buyout of a low-lying area, you know, in the evaluation process of the, or the screening process of going through what we're looking at for flood mitigation or flood management, you know, is there any way that those items could be included to help during that process if the the benefit cost ratio is not where we need it to be?
I believe there are in the calculation, Commissioner, environmental and social.
Already?
Christina,
Yeah,
I think I don't know. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't know if the project details would be a help here. And we'll be talking a lot more about this. I think TWDB will have a presentation, whether it's me giving it to y'all or we'll have another webinar. But for each project, the group is going to be, and the word score is confusing because that's not the same as ranking, but you'll be, for each of these categories that's listed on this slide, you'll be using a set of instructions for each one to assign a score for these categories. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Commissioner, but for example, if you have project A, you'll be going down this list that you see on the slide for each one and assigning a score for that category to that project. So how that project scores for environmental benefits, how it scores for social vulnerability, how it scores for nature-based solutions. And we'll be talking a lot in detail about how that's going to be done, but the group will be doing that. So I'm not totally sure if that answers your questions or if that.
Yeah, I think with the project details, that gives me a little more comfort.
Good.
Yeah, when I was just looking at some of the this BCR scoring criteria, that social vulnerability index is included in that benefit cost ratio, negative impact. So there's a lot of stuff that's not just, like you're saying, strictly on, do we pull out enough houses out of the floodplain to make this feasible in a respect of just strictly cost. So I think there's a lot more, I don't want to call them softer criteria that will be included in this BC ratio.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question. Is this 6-step process, is this brand new or is this something from someplace else? Has it ever been used before? Does it work well, etc.?
It's pretty much following the guidance. Am I right, Scott?
Yeah, this is developed strictly or straight out of what the Water Board has provided. So to say where that came from, I don't know the answer to that, to be perfectly honest. I think the process is just really trying to identify some criteria that they've spent or put forth to say, okay, these are the specific categories that we want to place these in. And this is what we're doing right now, is really placing them in categories and making sure that they meet the particular screening requirements. But has it been done before? I don't know if I can answer that, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure if it has specifically, although it's built on. So go ahead.
I'm sorry, Scott. No, I don't want to interrupt.
Oh no, I was just, all I was trying to get to is really it's based on, you know, maybe not specifically this exact process, but I've seen similar stuff over my years of doing studies and projects, is these are typically the standard levels of metrics that we're looking at to screen and make sure that these projects are will work within this planning document. So,
Yes, so Hudson, we have a really nice resource that has it broken down by task. So for example, this is task 4B, and for each task, it shows the rule language, which is like the rules in statute in the Texas Administrative Code that must be followed. And it has it in like a nice gray block where you're like, okay, what do the actual rules say? And it's in like a gray format. And then right under it is the guidance that my team wrote based off of those rules. So it's like you have the rules and you have the guidance that's like significantly longer that we wrote to try and help you meet those rules. So I'm happy to lift that up if you want to take a look at it. It's always worth, we have a lot of tasks. This is a long process. It's really a nice reminder to go back and look at each task. But I personally like that resource because it breaks it down visually. Like you have your rules, and then here's the stuff that flood planning team wrote based off of those rules, and that's what we call the guidance.
So what worries me is whenever, and I'm thinking of the FIF application that the Water Development Board came out with, one of the, go or stop kind of binary things was that you had to have a cost benefit ratio of 1, right? So there were a lot of categories, but if you didn't have a 1 or more in your cost benefit ratio, it was almost like stop and try again or submit another application. And so that's why I think Commissioner Garza's comment is very insightful. Not that there has to be a separate category for social vulnerability, but that's integrated into the cost benefit ratio. Because if somebody down the road is going to say, yeah, there's social vulnerability over here, but you also need to have a cost benefit ratio of 1 or more to keep going, then that almost defeats the purpose, because you stop your analysis the moment you don't hit 1 in your cost benefit ratio. At least that's what I saw in the FIF application.
Yeah, good comment. I think that, one of the examples that they showed us, Dr. Dale, in regards to this particular project detail that we're looking at was a Buffalo Bio project in Houston. Of course, the cost benefit analysis there far outweighed the cost, which is great. But that's one particular application where they might have used this process of going through what they did there.
And as we go through this, truthfully, we could modify it, just like I said on the goals, if as we're going through actually implementing it, if it needs to be tweaked, we can revisit it and then, propose some kind of revision to it.
And we are adopting the proposed ones, but we can modify them if we need to, moving into future meetings. Mr. Caso.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Commissioner.
One question. This is all predicated back to the step 1.3. The only projects that'll be considered have to be greater than 1 square mile.
That's what the basis for projects, correct. It's identified as a project. If it doesn't have that, it would be moved to like a study, so it moves forward beyond that. But there are caveats. If it is based on what the group wants to do, you can say we want to move this forward because of it's a critical facility, it affects the mobility, or for other reasons that really make it a more important project. That we really want to move that forward based on other different criteria besides just these very specific initial screening. So this really is an initial screening for this is what we're talking about here, just to help us kind of categorize what we've got and what we've collected over, over the last few months of stuff that's already out there and that we want to identify. So it's not specifically, but that's just the initial screening. That kind of answers the question.
Yeah, and
Commissioner Garza?
Yes.
I know you want a table contract amendment discussion. May I bring up a relevant note as briefly as possible?
Yes.
So before the additional funding, so say the additional funding never existed, you only have tasks 1 through 10. As a group in your regional flood plan, there was no performance of evaluations. So you were only identifying and recommending evaluations, your strategies, and your projects, not actually executing or performing any of the evaluations. Part of the additional funding that's now been granted, you're going to see when you review what Jaime has sent you and what I will also send you, that in addition to tasks 1 through 10, you will now have tasks 11, 12, and 13. And so one thing that task 12 does, the brand new thing, is that you'll be able to actually, there's funding to perform the evaluations that you identify in order to recommend additional projects. So that's a long way of saying before, like you had no funding to perform any evaluations. It was just like, okay, we'll do our best to recommend evaluations and projects. Now with this additional funding, you have the ability to perform the evaluations that you wish to in order to recommend additional projects. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but I feel like that's relevant to this conversation because you now get to do that, whereas before there was not funding or opportunity for that.
Well, when I read 4B, if I recall, it says, evaluations and potential feasible flood management strategies and projects. So is that a duplication?
No, because before you were only recommending evaluations to be performed, but now in task 12, you'll be able to perform those evaluations.
Okay, point well taken. Thank you.
Chairman, this is Joe Khalifa.
Yes, sir.
I had a similar question as Mr. Moore about the one square mile. There's if somebody has a 40-acre tract and they make a subdivision out of it, there may be 80 or 100 families out there, and the 1 square mile, they certainly is not a 1 square mile. So I think what I heard the answer was that there would be another process or another identifier to receive funding. Is that correct, or is the 1 square mile something that we can play with?
According to what we have on the page as is presented, you see the asterisk on 1.3, right? And the asterisk refers to except in instances of flooding of critical facilities or transportation routes, or for other reasons, including levels of risk or project size, which means that gives us the ability to make an exception, right, Christina or Scott?
That is correct. It says determined by the group. So you would have that ability and the opportunity to do that in a situation that you would describe if that came to a significant flood risk. And that's what we're talking about here. We're trying to eliminate the flood risks in the 100-year event. So that would allow that process to happen.
So a 40-acre subdivision is not 1 square mile, but it could easily fall into a project because it would be determined by the regional flood planning group that in that instance, because of the critical flooding, it could be included.
That's what I understand.
That sounds great. Thank you, Chairman. I have a second question though, and just for clarification, you indicated and Mr. Costa talked about the cost benefit ratio. I'm not sure I'm following. What kind of cases do you feel that we may have to do projects that are less than 1 on the cost benefit ratio? I don't see as a board member that I would ever support a project that didn't meet the cost benefit ratio of 1. So I'm not sure what the question was or what the answer is.
Mr. Joe, I'll
Yeah.
give you an example of something, and I know Commissioner Garza assisted too, and I'm not sure if Commissioner from Willis is still on, but there was an application that was submitted during this FIF for a community in Willis County with very low income that just floods tremendously, and they were asking for a lateral that was going to cost probably about $1 million, and under the FEMA toolkit cost benefit ratio, and we worked on it tremendously to help out Willisey, we couldn't hit 1. So that just means that if Willisey County, with an area that's not even incorporated in a city, it's just a pretty much a small community of houses that and that's where that flood event occurred. They wouldn't be able to apply And that's what concerns me, because they had standing water in their homes for months. And so they were more damaged than maybe some of the people that were hit with the, another event in higher income communities, because they just, they're very poor to begin with. And the damage that occurs damages them in a more profound way than, say, somebody in a more affluent area. And we can share the application with you. And it's just one of those things that, if that's the requirement, if it's binary in that way, then low income areas may not meet the requirement under at least the FEMA cost benefit ratio toolkit. That's what I think a lot of agencies use.
Thank you for that example.
Jaime, can I opine, Jaime, or can I issue, as I guess, as a sponsor? I know that this is Raul Cecina. I know you guys are the board discussion. Is it okay, Jaime, if I speak?
Yes, sure. That's fine. As group sponsor, you can opine, sir.
Okay, great. So yeah, so good morning, Commissioner and everyone. So the Willesee application, that's a good point, Pepe. We were able to get it above because there are other means, not just the financial evaluation of the local area. That was the first take that we took at it. We took it from an evaluation solely based on economics, and obviously we're able to do it after visiting with the Water Development Board and looking at the other options that were available via the toolkit. We were able to get that project. As a matter of fact, we're in the environmental phase right now to clear it, to hopefully get it to construction here soon. So there are means that I think that address that issue, as Commissioner brought up, regarding the social and the rural areas and things that don't have that what you guys are mentioning. The appraised values, I guess, to get it over one. But there are some methods there in that toolkit, the FEMA toolkit. And I'm sure the water memo toolkit, which I have not used, but I'm sure there's something in there that will allow us to take that into consideration. But it's good conversation to have, because I agree, it's not solely on the value of the residents in the area. It's the other impacts that probably have greater impact than that. So, with the social, economic, and everything else that you are talking about. But yeah, on that project, we were able to get it done, and it's actually it's environmental stage right now. But it's a very valid point, and it's something definitely to consider. I'm glad the board's discussing it.
I agree. I know that there was able, and I was just using it to illustrate that, here in the Valley, there was a potential. I know that there was a way to fix that, but there is conceptually very low income communities that are just not going to be able to meet that criteria, that really deserve the money or need the money.
Well, we don't want to be in any way discriminatory in how we do things, and we want to be as inclusive as possible. And many times, those areas are the ones that are the biggest problems for the counties and in our area.
Mm-hmm.
Could I take a moment to share my screen really briefly? I think it would be worth mentioning. I just pulled up the TWDB guidance on benefit cost analysis. I just want to draw y'all's attention to it, if I may.
Thank you.
Okay, can you all see?
Yes.
So here, just here. So it's preferable that the benefit cost ratio be more than 1. It says you may include projects with BCRs less than 1 with additional justification. And then we lay out acceptable and available methods for benefit cost analysis. One is the FEMA toolkit. One is Army Corps. One is ours. And then it says any other calculation with appropriate documentation and engineer certification. And this would be subject to our review. So you just want to pass it through us so we can look at it. And then I actually don't know much about this last line. I could find out, but I just wanted to show here the RFPGs may consider the triple bottom line. I'm sure many of you know or may be familiar with that better than I am. But in performing the benefit cost analysis, the triple bottom line approach considers social, environmental, and economic financial aspects of a project. So I just felt like that belonged here. I'm happy to raise any questions y'all have about it, but this is from our guidance, so I wanted to raise it here.
Well, and that was presented at the conference. That's why I came up. I didn't dream of those things.
Right.
I was listening that day.
Chairman, this is Joe Khalifa. I appreciate the example Mr. Casa provided, and I think it's great that what Raul answered is that they were able to make that project work. But I only bring up the fact because we need to continue to look at benefit cost analysis. And if that, I guess in my mind, I'm looking at it that if you didn't meet the one, then maybe that lateral may not be the answer, and maybe there needs to be a buyout or something. But I think it's a good discussion. But as a board member, I mean, I would always want to look at not throwing good money at a bad project, and I think that's what the benefit cost analysis does, is to make sure that you're spending the public money for a good project. So that was the purpose of my question, and I think it was a very good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khalifa. Any other comments in regards to where we're at right now? Okay.
If there are no more comments, Chairman, I'd ask that you approve
The procedures.
the procedures as presented.
Okay, and I will ask for a motion now, but make sure that everyone understands that we can make amendments as we move forward with this process. These are just the initial formal adoption of the procedures that we have. As long as we put it back on the agenda, we can always make an amendment to them. So at this point, I will entertain a motion to approve and adopt formally the procedures that have been presented up to now.
I make that motion. This is Joey Hinojosa.
Seconded, Riasul Mia.
Okay, any comments or questions before we vote? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Christina, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me start sharing my screen again. Here we go. Do y'all see it?
Now we do.
Okay, good. So thank you, Chairman and Group. Our last item today is Task 3A, recommendation on floodplain management standards. So let me move on to the next. Let me advance it. Okay. So far, it's not moving. Okay. So far, we have focused on the goals, the flood mitigation, the flood management goals. These will be the guideposts like we've talked about for the plan, and all the recommendations that will be presented in the plan, have to line up with those goals. Standards are different in that they're not targets. They are protocols, design standards, ordinances, practices for development, for land use. Goals are required in the plan. Standards, not necessarily. Water Development Board recommends that the Regional Flood Planning Group consider adopting or recommending floodplain management standards as a tool to mitigate flood risk, but they're leaving it up to the group to determine, what those standards are and how you want to establish it and what areas they pertain to. So, the NFIP, as part of the NFIP, entities are already subscribing to some sets of standards, like, developing to the BFE, not building in floodplains. But this is what we're talking about when we're talking about standards. They're different than goals. And I am going to hand this over. Oh, no, before I do, let me.
Christina.
Monday.
Do we have to adopt these standards today?
No, sir. You do not.
Because
they're not a requirement.
I really don't want to go more than an hour and a half at a meeting with everyone's time right now.
Sure. No.
Unless everyone wants to continue and go on longer, but I just feel that we can take an hour and a half pieces and try to move our meetings forward. If we start this process on the standards, I think it's going to go on for quite a while. If it's okay with the group, my suggestion would be that we would allow ourselves a chance to review the standards as being presented. At our subsequent meeting, we go ahead and after having looked at them and reviewed them and making notes, we can move swiftly through them and make some comments and then choose to either adopt or not adopt the standards, depending on what the majority wants to do. But I'd rather not rush through them today and miss something that we need to go over, if that's okay with the group.
If I could too, Commissioner, can I send some other materials for review too? Because I highly recommend reading along with Christina and her team's materials. There's 6 pages in our guidance that go over like the minimum standards that I think would be helpful to read too.
That would be great, Megan. You know, I do, and you know, I do plan to call a meeting for December the 15th, starting at 9 a.m. If everyone is available, and we can go over this and you know the amendments and everything else that we need to do, and give it more time. Any objections by anyone on the line? Any of the board members?
I agree, Commissioner.
I agree too.
I'm fixing to get off the line as I have another issue to contend with.
I know there's a number of, there's a number of folks that have some commitments, and I appreciate them redoing their schedules to accommodate us at least till 11. So, you know, I think that was my issue, my concern. You know, I don't want to lose our quorum. Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, one only thing I want to mention, if the communities just approve or adopt the FEMA minimum regulation, you're not going to resolve the flooding issues. You have to go with a little bit higher standard, maybe 0 rise, because the FEMA allows you 1 feet rise on the base flood elevation. Right. So guess what? Everybody start raising 1 foot, but the end of whoever is in the downstream getting flooded all the time.
So we need to look at the standards and make sure that we give them careful consideration.
And just as a note,
and I will also encourage communities like what we did. We also have a green space preservation ordinance. We don't allow development. We have a stream buffer zone, so we are basically protecting the stream, and it become very expensive for developers to they start not touching it. Because that's how we just have to be a little bit aggressive. I know it's a political issue, but that's how you can save the communities in future.
Thank you for bringing that up, Mia. Christina, you had a comment?
Oh no, that was me, Commissioner Garza, I think, unless Christina, you had a comment.
Yes.
Yeah, so just a brief note, as you review the materials, so these minimum standards will be, if you choose to adopt any, will be minimum standards that local project sponsors must meet to have their projects included in the regional flood plan at all. So you don't have to adopt any, you can, but that's how these will be used, is that the local project sponsors must meet those standards to have their projects in the plan at all.
Well, we have to practice what we preach, right? So,
and I would just add one thing, that, for example, say a drainage district within a certain county wants to put a project in there, but the commissioner's court of that particular county, or say a city council, doesn't want to adopt those standards. Well, then that means that the drainage district's project cannot occur. So I just worry about that potential situation where, you know, there are so many overlapping governmental entities that may have good drainage projects, but they may not be the entity that's ultimately responsible for adopting those standards, or with the county's limited powers, the county itself may not be able to control that other than through the model subdivision rules and so forth. So I just, I don't want to leave anybody out of the equation just because somebody else chooses not to participate or other dynamics like that.
Well, we have to be mindful of what we do, approve it or choose to approve as a standard. Thank you, Picasso,
Mhm.
bringing that up, you know. Any other comments to consider before we're given homework by Megan and Christina? Megan, when can you send that information to us? So that it can-
Today, I can do it as soon as the meeting's over.
Okay, could you include that with the other package with Jaime, with the
Yes.
webinar? Okay. Jaime, you know what you need to send us?
It's
Okay,
already been sent, Commissioner.
okay. So December the 15th at 9 a.m. will be the next meeting unless otherwise notified. I will open one other item on the agenda. Is any public comment out there from anyone that might be on the line that wishes to make any public comment? Hearing none, I will consider a motion to adjourn.
So
Motion
move.
to adjourn.
Second.
Moved in second, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Everyone have a happy thanks and safe Thanksgiving. And be careful out there. And we'll await the materials so that we can have reading material. Okay,
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you all. Happy Thanksgiving.
Right.
Thank you.
You. Bye-bye.